Hey guys, Dana here. It has been a hot minute since I jumped on to, to see what I look like. And also, we're going to be talking about childbirth today. I have got years of experience as a doula in Philadelphia with helping mothers in all sorts of interesting situations navigate their childbirth journeys um, through services that would include going with my client to the hospital. So, as somebody that has been with a variety of clients in very interesting medical situations, I've been to attended home births and birth centers and hospital births. And so, I wanted to say all that by saying that I am a certified labor doula through Childbirth International. I also hold a certificate as a hypno babies hypno doula, and have worked with clients that wanted to use hypnosis instead of using an epidural, which I have done. Most women that have had a natural childbirth do describe the experience as being a good experience. So it led me to deeper thinking, right? And I haven't worked as a doula since prior to 2020 because the way that completely destroyed women's last bastion of support in that arena is wholly unfair and could be just a topic of a whole nother discussion. But today I wanted to talk about specifically about birth. So this might be a little bit more for the ladies, but we are going to talk about the father's role. We're going to talk about how men we're going to be gently encouraging men to get involved during the birth, both before, during, and after. And what I want to teach people is how to advocate for themselves in these situations. They're in a medical situation, they're in a hospital, they feel like, the woman is in pain, the man wants the woman not to be in pain, wants to make sure that she's safe. We abdicate our role to our healthcare providers. And within that, while the provider themselves may be good, they're restricted in what they can do because of policies that are in place. I call them CYA policies. These people have to cover their ass when you're in there giving birth. So I wrote down a bunch of things. Nothing I say should be taken as medical advice. Everything that you do should be wholly approved by your trusted healthcare provider. That means that you have to trust your healthcare provider. Is your healthcare provider really worthy of your trust? I think that's the first question to ask. There is an idea that the first intervention in birth is leaving your home. Traditionally, home birth has been the cultural norm. You have to think that these Rockefeller hospital systems were up and running for a while before they realized that they could profit off of healthcare. Once they realized they could profit off of providing these services, women on a generational level have forgotten how to give birth. They have been so far removed from the process. Now, like just myself, for example, if it had been 200 years ago, I would have attended the other births that my mother had. I would have heard the noises that she made. I would have been familiar with normal newborn behavior. I would have had a little bit more life experience to call back on, and then to decide whether or not that life experience was true in the realm of what they're saying. So when we talk about childbirth, common interventions in childbirth, your first exposure to the medical pharmaceutical complex. Most women, I would say childbearing women, they have, of course, gone to doctor's appointments their entire lives and perhaps have seen an OBGYN and are at least familiar with that. But this introduction to the medical pharmaceutical complex is absolutely insane. And again, nothing I say should be taken as medical advice. Always do what your trusted healthcare provider tells you to do. I'm simply opening up topics so that we can have a little bit of a discussion. Your experiences in childbirth. I want to hear I would love to hear from men. I'd love to hear from men how childbirth was for them. I've spent a lot of time academically studying for my certifications, and also just engaging in the birth community, being a part of a hypno babies group that was previously on, what was that, Baby Center maybe? And it was just a group of moms that all had hypno births, and within there you could go to the link and it would be their birth story, and I found that so enriching. I love the idea that women can share these experiences, because it's really a way to like regain the knowledge that we lost through generations of Western medicalized childbirth. And so what I want to talk about is, how do those systems of control affect our ability to bond securely? How does that affect the bond between not just the mother and the child, but the father and the mother, the father and the child, the family unit as a whole? Because I find in childbirth that the men really get left behind, and that's not ever my goal. When I come into a space as a doula, and again, I'm not selling anything. I don't work as a doula. I'm not trying to get clients right now. I wouldn't take them if they came to me. So that's not about what this is about. This is more about pulling that experience in and helping people understand how they can take control, we've abdicated our health, number one, just by leaving the home. We have allowed the white coats to take over a process that, for the most part, is fairly natural and doesn't require a whole lot of intervention. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about, as I sip my tea and spill all my juicy secrets about childbirth and the absolutely abhorrent things that I have seen doctors do. The way I've seen doctors treat women. And, I'm somebody that generally doesn't buy into the critical blank theory of the day. I think from an academic standpoint, there is a lot of value in studying that and having discussions based on that. But what I don't think, we can't apply it to every situation. However, in my own experience, I was working as a doula in Philadelphia. So I had a number of clients that were African American. They absolutely get treated differently. They do. Again, I'm not somebody that generally buys into that critical race theory stuff. But the truth of the matter is that Black women are absolutely treated differently in childbirth than white women. And it doesn't matter their socioeconomic status, because I've worked with low income single mothers. I've also worked with, higher income academics, two people that were pursuing doctorates that were geniuses in a way I'll never understand. So I've seen it from both sides. They really are treated differently. One of the first interventions that happens after you leave your home is that you've gone from a quiet, safe space. Think about when you're giving birth. You don't want to be somewhere that's brightly lit. You want to think about what an animal does when they're getting ready to give birth. Like a cat will drag some blankets and make a little nest, and it'll be far off. It's not going to be where like all the other animals can find it, right? So then the cat, she goes into labor, and she does this more or less on her own without a whole lot of intervention in most cases. And childbirth is in fact designed to work that way physiologically, that we are capable of gestating and birthing a baby. It doesn't require, it doesn't in all situations even require a doctor. However, when women go into the hospital, there are a number of interventions that take place right away. So we're going to discuss those. We're going to go one by one. Apparently I have comments. Guys, I never go live, and I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, somebody sent me, is that to me? Riz sent me, oh, thank you. Okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but thank you. It says I have comments, swipe to the right. I'm swiping, nothing's happening. So I am just going to keep on going, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know what the I did. Oh, there it is. Okay. I'm really not good at this, you guys. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to start going through these interventions. If anybody would like to share their birth story with me, I would love to hear it. I am definitely a big birth story junkie. Like, I absolutely adore hearing people's birth stories. So we get to the hospital, right? If you've had a baby, what's the first thing they do? The first thing they do is they place an IV. They put two belts on you. One is going to measure the frequency and length of contractions, the tachometer. The other one is going to monitor fetal heart rate. That'll go a little bit. So the tachometer typically goes to this part of the abdomen, and then down here pretty low, you're going to have the fetal heart rate monitor, okay? Now, an interesting thing about continuous fetal monitoring, which means that you wear those bands the whole time, versus intermittent fetal monitoring, is when doctors are trained on emergency medicine and they are continuously watching someone's labor pattern. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, Okay, so the studies that have been done, not medical advice, always go with what your trusted healthcare provider tells you because your friendly white kit is there for you. Okay. Continuous fetal monitoring versus intermittent, typically 15 minutes out of every hour. So without that, you can walk further than 8 feet from your hospital bed. You can walk around the maternity floor. You have freedom of movement. You could get in the shower or in a tub, which some hospitals have a labor tub now. So you could get in the labor tub. There are reasons why you want to be mobile in labor. The best way to cope with pain, most people that are in pain in labor will naturally kind of lean over on something and sway their hips. This is really hard to do if you're laying completely flat on your back. Go figure. So one of the things you might want to discuss with your trusted healthcare provider that you should always believe, definitely not me, I'm just a crazy lady on the internet. We are discussing things here so that we can have like an intelligent conversation, and maybe you guys be like, oh, hey, this reminds me of that. And then you go ahead and research it on your own. That's what I want to see happen. So continuous fetal monitoring did not result in better outcomes for moms or babies. However, what it did result in is a higher rate of cesarean section. And that comes with its own set of interventions and issues. Okay. The other thing to watch for, most hospitals are going to want to put you on an IV right away. If you are planning to get an epidural, most hospitals will require you to have at least one full bag of fluids. Some hospitals require or like to have two. The reason for this is that an epidural can lower your blood pressure by making sure your body is very well hydrated. This is less likely to be a problematic side effect of the epidural. So they're going to want to go in and put the IV in. One of the things you might want to talk about with your trusted healthcare provider, whose advice you should always take 100%, do everything they say, everything is safe and effective, everything's good, right? Okay, so one of the things you might want to discuss is when you go into the hospital, and if you're not planning on the epidural, of course, to ask if you can have just the port put in. I forget what they used to call it. There was a term 10 years ago, but they don't use it anymore. So basically, you have the IV in. So if there is some kind of an emergency in your childbirth and you did have to be, say, rushed into a cesarean section, they're not trying to do all of the poking and prodding in the middle of an emergency. They're going to do it and have everything set up this way they can just pop a needle in if they have to, okay? This again allows you freedom of movement. This will give you more than 8 feet. Now, for 45 minutes out of every hour, 40 minutes out of every hour in some hospitals, you're free to walk around, to move, to get into positions that help you relieve your pain. I would suggest that it is extremely difficult to have a natural childbirth with all of the common interventions, and if you were to do it their way. And you should always do it their way because they are always right. The science has never been wrong, and it is so. So you can ask for just the port. This is a little bit of a compromise. It gives you the opportunity not to have to be completely, you get real swollen afterwards too, and you get all these bags of fluids. You suddenly wake up and you're like, whoa, I have cankles now. To ask not to have the IV fluids, that you should be able to eat and drink by mouth. Okay. Some hospitals now have brightened up to the idea that moms can eat and drink in labor. It's interesting because the body does require calories in order to go through this entire process. However, the place where we're intended to go through the process for decades has been telling women not to eat or drink. And their reasoning behind that is if there was an emergency cesarean section and they had to intubate you, like knock you out cold, not numb you from here down and you get but out completely. The idea is that if you had food in your stomach, you could potentially aspirate that food and then choke on it and die. So don't eat at all. Now, some labors can take anywhere, an average for a first-time mom, I know nobody wants to hear this, 18 to 24 hours. Okay? I cannot eat for 18. I mean, I could not eat, but my body would be weak from it, right? especially if you're used to eating 3 meals a day or to snacking lately. Now, what I found is that in childbirth, no woman wants to go get a cheeseburger, right? They're not noshing on Big Macs. What women will typically snack on is something that I try to say nutrient-dense foods, something like crackers, cheese, and grapes, or some kind of fruit, some kind of fat, some kind of carb, and let them lightly snack on that. Women are not going to eat so much food that they're throwing up in labor. However, by allowing them to get calories into their body, you're providing the body with the fuel that it needs to birth the babies. Okay, so those are the first 3 interventions. Now I want to do another, like a whole series where I lay out all these interventions, but we haven't even gotten to the good stuff. We're not even talking about the medicines yet. We're not even talking about pain relief options yet. And the nice thing for you ladies, pardon me, I'm past childbearing years here. Okay, I'm like not even. No, I keep getting it. I think I'm going to turn out pregnant, like a surprise pregnancy, though. I keep getting a weird feeling. I hope I'm wrong. Anyway, for you ladies, so there are a lot of pain relief options out there. You know, not everybody wants to have a natural birth. That's totally fine. It's not for everybody. For me, it was deeply personal, and I wanted to make sure that I maintained the bonds with my daughters. And in some situations, that was impossible. I had a baby that was born at 34 weeks, my first daughter. They let me hold her for, if it was even a minute, when she was first born. So she was in NICU for 2 weeks, and I really I found it very difficult to bond with her. And I found it difficult to bond. I think I was genuinely traumatized by the experience. I went to a hospital that was a teaching hospital, and nothing went wrong. You know, there was no problems. I wasn't treated poorly by the staff, but there were so many people in the room when I gave birth. I don't even know how many people saw my JJ that day. They have a NICU team in there, which is generally 2 or 3 doctors, and they're there for the baby specifically, right? So they're kind of just standing there, and they're cute because they're just standing there all like annoyed, like, they got to get back upstairs, you know? So the NICU staff is there. You also have a high-risk obstetrician, but it was a teaching hospital. And my mother was a nurse, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm cool with students. But at the end of the day, it ended up being like damn near a dozen people. And that was overwhelming. I had so been looking forward to this squishy little baby that I was finally going to get to hold and to essentially have her taken out of my arms. It was just heartbreaking. It was just absolutely heartbreaking. And it took a while before I really put my finger on and identified what it was that made things so hard. And, you know, there are a couple different things. I can tie a lot of these things back to modern medicalized childbirth. And that is when my conspiracy brain started to kick on, because I started to look into all these things. Well, like, why am I not allowed to eat again? In what other situation would you, as an adult woman, in what other situation would you allow somebody to tell you that you're not permitted to eat? How about if you're on the monitors, continuous fetal monitoring, meaning the monitors don't come off the entire labor? How about you have to call a nurse to go to the bathroom? Sounds a lot like public schools, don't it? Sounds a lot like a paradigm that you've been born into, that you don't even recognize is a paradigm designed specifically to separate you from your connection to the Creator. Yeah. If you guys have any other birthy things that you wanted to talk about, please let me know. I'm going to go ahead and scroll through some of these comments here. I don't think there are many comments. Yeah, no, there's no real comments. Okay, 2 new messages. Is that me? Mm-hmm. The next thing I wanted to talk about is Pitocin. Pitocin is a common, none of this should be taken as medical advice. Always do what your trusted healthcare provider tells you to do. The science is settled. Duh. These are just topics for discussion. We are going to be talking about Pitocin versus oxytocin. And this, to me, I could nerd out on this shit for at least an hour. Oxytocin versus Pitocin. When we're in labor, there are a number of hormones. There are a number of hormones in labor that potentiate the labor process and also provide pain relief for the mother. All of these things are symbiotic. They're all attached to one another. And once you kind of poke a hole in one, you kind of started deflating all the rest. So knowing the difference between oxytocin and Pitocin is important because it might help you make better decisions in your labor. Oxytocin is also known as the love hormone. A woman's level of oxytocin, the love and bonding hormone, will never be higher in her life than when she gives birth. In the golden hour post-birth, the mother's oxytocin levels, their bonding levels, their love hormone is as high as it's ever going to be. And I think that's intentional. Obviously, the mother has to be bonded to the infant because, quite frankly, it's going to cry and not sleep a lot. It takes a lot of patience to put up with somebody that cries and doesn't sleep a lot and also wants to suck on your boob all the time. So this bonding hormone, the bonding that happens on a psychological level is key to developing empathy. I think when we take oxytocin out of the birth picture because we've replaced it with Pitocin. Pitocin is a medication. They'll say, oh, it's just a medicine that helps your contractions come, closer together so we can get you dilated, get the baby out. And all of that makes sense. However, when you interrupt the way oxytocin plays in with melatonin, plays in with the other hormones that make childbirth happen, we've interrupted a process, and now we're going to be forever catching up to that process. Now, the other thing that oxytocin does is it helps with your production of endorphins. Endorphins are designed to help you cope with pain. If somebody's ever been a long distance runner, they're familiar with runner's high. I've gotten it occasionally while doing endurance bike riding, but I think running, it's just a little bit easier. Now, pardon me. That will help you. Excuse me, I went down the wrong foot. The endorphins will work along to help you get through childbirth easier without pain medication. The issue with Pitocin, right? So if we go to Pitocin sorry, I'm getting totally confused here, guys. I'm going to go back to my notes so that I can get a better sense of where I'm at. Right. Okay. So they're going to tell you that Pitocin is used to induce labor contractions, and all of these things are 100% true. It will induce labor contractions. However, what it tends to do is if you're already having contractions, it's going to, where a contraction is like a wave. It builds slowly, and then it goes up, and then it crashes down. Okay. Once that crashes down, the contraction ends. With Pitocin, it's less like a wave, and it's more like contraction, and then it comes down. These contractions are long and they're strong. They override the mother's own production of oxytocin. Once the production of oxytocin is shut off, potentially, allegedly, for entertainment purposes only, always take your medical advice, trust the science, it's settled. Once you shut off the woman's production of oxytocin by introducing Pitocin, you also shut down the body's other hormonal functions, such as that of the production of adrenaline and endorphins. So these things, it's not just something to give you contractions. Some of the risks that come along with Pitocin is that contractions can get too long and too strong before the baby's really ready. And this can cause bradycardia, slow heart rate. These are considered serious side effects that are potentially there. The other thing with Pitocin is it can be adjusted. It can go up. You might be on Pitocin for 10 hours before you start to have contractions because they go so slowly and they put it up very incrementally, which I appreciate. That's what they're supposed to do. You're so weird. Reported for what, Jackson? Not medical advice. Always trust the science. It is 100% settled. Don't ever trust somebody that you just see on a TikTok live. You should always go ahead and do your own research. If you'd like some books, I can let you know. everything that I say can be backed up with studies or with a paper book that I have in my library right now. So you can report it all you want. So Pitocin is used to induce labor contractions. It can cause contractions if you're not having any. In my case, personal experience, not medical advice, my water broke and I was not having contractions and I was 34 weeks. So the hospital started to get very, very nervous. They wanted me to kind of get labor going. And at this point, to this day, I would have to go back and actually look at my medical records to see if any of them report whether or not I received Pitocin. But all of a sudden, my contractions were unbearably painful. And despite my best efforts to want to have a natural birth, I was unable to do so. I did ask for the epidural and was glad to get it at that point because again, I was not prepared. My husband was not prepared at all. I remember at one point having a contraction, a really, really painful one. And I had back labor because she was posterior, meaning that her back should have been against my front. This should have been her spine. And then back here should have been her face. She was turned the other way. That means her spine is against my spine. So when we have contractions, it's all of that spine pushing together and it's quite painful. I remember having this terrible contraction where I'm just leaning over on the bed and I'm like, oh God, I don't know if I can do this. Oh God, my back. And I look at my husband for some kind of relief, right? And his face is this, ready? His face went like that. And I'm like, yeah, that's not the type of labor coach I was precisely hoping for. Can I get a fucking epidural stat? And I did. I got the epidural, and then I did end up having her vaginally a few hours later. They did try to convince me that I had to have a C-section after 3 hours of pushing, and they were prepping the room to have the cesarean. And there was a nurse who kind of came up. She's like, you know, look, we're getting ready to take you in for the C-section. We're cleaning the room up now. If you're going to push, this is it. You have to do it now because they're not going to let you keep going like this. After about 3 hours of pushing, first of all, if you have an epidural, the first hour of pushing is learning how to push because you're literally numb from just under the boobs all the way down. And once you're numb, like, dude, weird people keep trying to like invite me on the thing. Like if I know you, we're friends, you drop a comment, you want to come on, I'm totally fine with that. Share your birth experience with me. I'm here to listen. Let's talk about it. Let's try to pinpoint what was good about it so that we can reproduce that. And let's try to pinpoint what you didn't like about it so that we can try to avoid that and find other avenues. Like I'm all about somebody wanting to come in and join, but can we at least be friends and not be some person trying to sell me the next sham wow or something? Jesus Christ. So once I was pushing with her, the nurse kind of got in my ear and was talking me through what was going to happen with the C-section. And I pushed and she came out. And thank God. And she had a cone head. Oh my God. She had a literal cone head for like a couple of weeks. It was pretty crazy. She really was something. No, I don't know you. So at this point, I want to talk about, I was going to do estimated due dates. Let's switch to something a little bit different. At this point, I want to talk about the men. I want to talk about the men, the fathers, their role in birth, how they find themselves. How did they find the birth experience, right? So one of the most fascinating things, I love this part of my job so much because when I was an active doula, I would go to my client's house and meet with them in their home twice before the birth, sometimes 3 times. It would really depend. I had a standard contract, but I always let my clients know how completely flexible I was with that. So I had a stipulation in my contract that should my client need a scheduled C-section, that I would either plan to be there for the C-section or she could get postpartum doula services afterwards. I try to tailor my contract to each of my clients and let them, the point of having a doula is to learn what your options are in childbirth, because there's a saying, I forget the quote, I forgot who said it, but a woman said, if you don't know your options, then you don't have any. And I thought that was fascinating because it's so true in the birth world. If you get caught up and you're just doing what everybody else is doing, you're going to the hospital, you get your IV, you get on the monitors, you lay there, you get an epidural, you put your baby out, 1 out of 3 chance you're going to have a C-section, which is major abdominal surgery. There's a lot going on there. And I wonder how the men feel in this experience because it's so far outside the realm of what they're used to. And now, whereas women have been removed from generations from childbirth, men have almost always historically been removed from childbirth. It wasn't until, the medical association, the doctors wanted to get their hands on that midwifery money. That is when childbirth moved to the hospitals. And that is when we lost the generational knowledge about how to cope with labor pains, how to assist a mother while she's giving birth and immediately afterwards. Where do the men stand in all of this? And so one of my favorite parts of my job is when I would go to my clients' houses, I would love talking to the guys and learning about like, what do you even know about childbirth is where I would start. Because the truth of the matter is a lot of men will just be like, nothing, like what I've seen in movies. That's what I know. And I'll ask, have you ever, even watched a birth video or maybe like a TV show about birth? Nope. So it became interesting to me the more I thought about it that men have been excluded from the birthing space for all of recorded history. And then in like 1980s, we're like, oh, Dad, you're going to go in, you're going to be her coach. And the guys are like, okay, yeah, I'll go in and I'll be the coach. They never played the fucking game. We don't even know what coach. How can he coach if he doesn't take the time to study, to learn through 10 classes? He can't. And the expectation that men should just be the coach is kind of silly. You have your doctors, your nurses that are there. They're there for the medical care of you and your child. However, what a doula does is a doula is a non-medical role where we step in and we talk about what's the word? Consigliere. It's like a consigliere. Am I saying that right? Is that the right word? Can somebody help me with that? When you go to a fancy hotel and they have a person and their job is just like find you what you need and get things. And that's what a doula is. I do childbirth education before the birth. I attend the birth with the client. I go and visit them postpartum, do breastfeeding help, over the phone help, colic, diapers, whatever, formula, what do you need? But a doula really attends to the mother and the father. And sometimes it's making sure dad has enough to eat. Because I've had clients where like the men were so caught up that they weren't eating. I had a client pass out at the actual birth. At the moment of birth, as the baby was exiting the womb and coming up this way, he turned green and went down this way. Totally just passed out. So the nurses were like, because they had to call other nurses in because they needed a nurse for the baby because the baby was born. She was like, did he really just pass out? And then he was over there, like no idea with what happened. And this is not a knock on the dad because this guy was an incredibly attentive, wonderful, husband and father from what I could see. But he completely passed out. And so we want to make sure that the men are taking the time to eat too. And if we aren't allowing the women to eat, how do we expect the men to sit there and eat in front of the women? If we have these kind of nonsensical rules that aren't even evidence-based within the modern childbirth paradigm, we're not benefiting the dads at all. If I was in labor and I was hungry, I would not be very happy if my husband sat there and ate a Big Mac in front of me. I would be pretty pissed. And I think that trying to enforce these silly rules on mothers, it's a humiliation ritual. Most of what we experience today in modern life is a humiliation ritual. And it's a humiliation ritual that we're forced to repeat. We're forced to repeat it because every time we do, that path becomes more clear. We become more, what's the word I'm looking for? Every time we submit to one of these humiliation rituals, we abdicate our power and authority and autonomy. And if we're going to advocate our power, power, authority, and autonomy, if we're going to give that over to the medical establishment, then we really need to make sure that that medical establishment is looking out for our best interests. I gotta ask, since 2020, how many people feel like the medical establishment is really looking out for them? I'm just asking questions. I just notice things. I talk to people about birth all the time. It's so funny because when I'm out in public and somebody hears that I'm a doula, everybody tells me their birth story all the time. Always happens. And I love it. I think it's great. I would be happy to listen to birth stories all the time. In fact, back in Philadelphia, some of the more woo-woo doulas in the area would have birth circles where they would go and talk about their birth stories in a supportive environment full of women, kind of like old-timey, village stuff. The kind of village you want raising your child, not the village that's currently raising your child. And I think that's really interesting. So every time I go out and people find out that I worked in that field, everybody tells me their birth story. Sometimes these stories are downright horrifying. Do y'all want to hear a crazy story? Do you want to hear a story that will make you laugh, or do you want to hear a story that's going to piss you off? That's going to get you riled up against the machine? Because I'm down for either. I have stories out the wazoo, things I've seen doctors do. Holy shit. I have a really great story. So I'm going to tell you a story about my experience. I'm not going to name the hospital. And I'm only not going to name the hospital because the nurses there were so awesome to me. I was there as a doula. The birth had taken a very long time. This doctor, no lie, I actually looked him up. He was 81 years old, still working as an OBGYN. At one point, he came in. My client had gotten an epidural. She was sleeping. Okay, it was 3 a.m. This MF comes in. He flips the lights on, puts his gloves on, doesn't wake my client up, doesn't say anything to my client, and does a vaginal exam. She wakes up like, what? That to me constitutes assault. Yes, you're her doctor. Yes, she is in labor. However, you can say, hey there, Dana, we want to check your progress. Can I do a vaginal exam? It took me 5 seconds. So the fact that he was so willing to come in and perform such an invasive procedure without even acknowledging my client's presence told me everything I needed to know about this particular white coat. So we get through the birth, and that was crazy, unnecessarily traumatic, because that doctor was in a rush to go home because he wasn't happy that his 81-year-old ass had been kept up all night. He wasn't happy that he had been kept up all night, so here we are. We do the birth. I'm standing right at my client's side. She's still in stirrups. He did an episiotomy so that he could apply a vacuum. She had been pushing for 15 minutes. 15 minutes of pushing with an epidural. And this guy decides it's not going fast enough. We need to do a vacuum. So they cut an episiotomy. I want to be able to tell you what an episiotomy is without getting like censored or banned here. An episiotomy is a cut between the opening where the baby comes out, right here, and then the opening where poop comes out way back here. So they cut the episiotomy into the skin, apply a vacuum, and literally yank this baby out. I don't know how this man is allowed to practice medicine. Even the nurses, I had worked with these nurses and attended a number of births with these nurses, and I had even developed friendships with medical staff that was outside of that, simply as a result of having attended so many births at this hospital. Even those nurses were horrified at his behavior. So we get through the birth. He gets done stitching her up. When I say his bedside presence was gruff at best, he was just downright ignorant, rude, short-tempered, would answer one or two words to every valid question that they had. What was another one? Delayed cord clamping. She had one of delayed cord clamping. This is when the baby's born. They put the baby up on your chest, and you don't cut the umbilical cord until it basically turns white and floppy. When it comes out, it's blue and it's full. And if you allow that natural process to happen, all of the blood, that's not all the blood, some of the blood and nutrients that are in the placenta get transferred to the baby. He didn't want to do delayed cord clamping because, again, he had been there all night and he was 81 years old. He was tired of it. So they weren't allowed to do that. Just so many things. We get to the end of the birth. I'm standing to my client's side. He's there. Everything's bloody because childbirth is just bloody. He takes off his gloves. Oh my effing God. He takes his gloves off. He goes, have you ever taken off a dirty pair of gloves? What do you do? What do you do when you take off a dirty pair of gloves? I don't feel like this is a really hard question. I don't feel like you have to have any medical training to figure this out. If you have gloves that are covered in blood and amniotic fluid, how would you take those gloves off? Like this? Maybe like this. Get my hands in here. Like this. Kind of put them down. You go over to this trash can, peel one off. You hold it in this hand, right? Like this. And then you peel the other glove off and down. This is so that all of the blood and the amniotic fluid doesn't end up all over the doula that's sitting next to the client. He takes his gloves off. He whips these gloves off. The fastest fucking move I've seen this old bastard make the whole night. I am covered in blood and amniotic fluid from my client because of this motherfucker. The blood gets in my mouth, in my eyes. So I didn't have glasses at the time. Got in my eyes. Was all over my shirt. Great. So then I'm looking up, can you get AIDS? Can you get AIDS if you swallow infected blood? Great question. So glad I'm Googling this at like 8 a.m. on a fucking Saturday. All right. Can you get... Bottom line is I had to go and have blood work drawn at the hospital. The nurses, and this is why I'm not going to say the name of the hospital. The nurses, the one I was friendly with, got the file, and I knew I would be okay, right? However, I can't say that I know that about all my clients. And it was very infuriating to me that this man was willing to risk health and safety, not just of my client, but of her baby and of me. A complete disregard for everybody present because he felt like it had taken too long. It was one of the shittiest births I've been to. I didn't take another birth for like a month after that. I was completely freaked out by the idea of catching some kind of disease that potentially could be life-altering or life-halting, I guess would be another way of saying it. Just like, you know, not all McDonald's workers are good McDonald's workers. Not all artists are great painters. And not all doctors care about your health. That shouldn't be something that gets me banned or reported. Doctors can be wrong, and they can be bad people. I think primarily because they go into it. I think they go into it for the right reasons. So I'm not necessarily trying to knock on the profession as a whole. Obviously, they get into it for the right reasons. However, if you have hung around enough OBGYN floors, they will tell you that OBGYN is the field that the dumbest doctors go into because it's it's easy. It is easy if you control and manipulate every normal physiological function of the process in which you're supposed to be overseeing. The role of a doctor or a midwife in birth should be to basically stand back until they ask for help. And that should be the only way. Let's see, no comments. Oh man, nobody's really active today. I mean, it's cool. I appreciate you like No, it's crazy. I see that somebody liked the live. I don't know how to like a live. If anybody can tell me how to like a live, like send me a message, throw it on here. I don't know how to do that. I think I've done maybe 5 or 6 lives. And I do also have this going up on YouTube. I'm trying to figure out if I can. My channel right now is all with underscores. Mom calls the shots on YouTube. So that's also where I'm going to be posting this. I would like to make this a weekly series. However, because of the way that videos here are censored so often, I'm really trying to explore alternative platforms and profiles. So far I've looked into, obviously, Rumble. I have an account. I just don't know how to, I'm not a tech, a middle-aged tech person here. I'm like I don't know what the fuck I'm doing here, honestly. I'd love to learn more how to post on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Vimeo. The problem is navigating the censors. It's like I have to speak in code. I have to put all kinds of disclaimers about, always trust your healthcare provider. Nothing I say should be taken as medical advice. However, I'd really like to cover more topics. And so these are some of the topics that I currently have that I'm working on. We're going to talk about the reliability of estimated due dates, because estimated due dates are used so often to bring women in for an induction. And mostly the way they're doing inductions now is with Pitocin, and we did cover that earlier. So estimated due dates, when is your baby really due? And where did that rule even come from? Would it shock you to learn that it is from 1812? The way we are calculating due dates is a formula that was created in 1812. So I want to talk a little bit more about estimated, about estimated due dates, how we came to trust them. I also want to talk a little bit about what's the solution to this and how do we help men. I really am feeling called, one could say, pulled in that direction, that it is time to take my focus in childbirth and doula work not off of women, but to also bring the men on board in an even more prominent role. Because I think ladies, we've done men dirty. We really did. Bringing them into a birth and expecting them to be like a coach without any training of how the game is played, not fair. Not fair. I think men experience trauma in childbirth in a very different way. I think that for men, it's an extremely vulnerable position when we go into childbirth. I would absolutely adore being able to talk to a dad that's open to having that discussion and to being vulnerable privately, just so I can get some ideas here about how we can help them. I want to talk for fathers to feel empowered to lead and to change things moving forward. I think there is also, as somebody that's a patient, right? Ladies, we know we get treated very differently when we have our husbands in the room. Can anybody agree with me on that? Does anybody agree with me that women are treated differently by medical professionals when their husband's in the room? Because I can tell you from my own experience, that's 100% true. 100% true. Kids as well. It's interesting how the doctors treat mothers that are just there by themselves and how the doctors treat mothers that are there with the fathers. Very, very different. Very different. And I think this is like a systemic problem. I'm not saying that the doctors are different or even do it on purpose. I simply think that's the way they've been brainwashed. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what do I have? 50% of that. Okay, I'm not sure. The idea of not being involved with the birth, that it doesn't appeal to a man's nature. Man's nature is to protect his wife and his child. The father is simultaneously, and then again, that's what trauma is. Trauma is your body having to go through an experience that you want to escape. Most men, like I don't know how many men really, really, really want to be there. We kind of made them feel like they had to be, but I'm curious how many men really would be if they had a choice. And the same for the ladies. Maybe you're just not into childbirth either, and you want to go to your sister's childbirth. That's where a doula comes in. A doula can help you understand your options. Doula can help you learn to communicate and advocate better with your healthcare providers, with all the people in the system, to understand each person's role in the system, to understand that when we start an intervention, that typically then what we have is known as the cascade of intervention, because one precipitates another and it just keeps going that way. So how can we kind of get in front of that? How can we cut that off at the start, not need the intervention, so we don't have this this kind of downward spiral, just more and more and more, ending with a surgical birth. The man being there to advocate for his wife does a lot to change the nature of the birthing room. So that is, I guess, my next little TikTok project perhaps is going to be making a video about men in childbirth. So yeah, I think I'm going to be focusing on the guys a little bit more. In the next one, especially, we're going to talk about once the baby is actually born, we have the hour-long bonding time. If you remember earlier, I talked about oxytocin being the love hormone. The woman's oxytocin will never be higher than it is in that 1 hour following childbirth, and why that's so important for bonding, the development of empathy, and for a baby to essentially organize this experience in their brain. There's a lot of growing that's happening in that 1 hour, even though we're not seeing it on the outside. Connections are being made and formed, and neural pathways are being created that didn't exist before. And this is a really important time, and women need to absolutely do everything they can to fight for that hour of uninterrupted skin to skin contact with the fresh little newborn. And they are all just smell them. They're so cute. There are solutions here. Reclaiming the birthing space is so empowering to women that sometimes I think that's what they're afraid of. If we all really understood how strong and powerful we were, would they be allowed to continue this kind of this super weird these super weird humiliation rituals? Again, it's just like yeah, it's time to cut them off. That's what I'm going to say. Reclaiming birth allows us to take back a part of ourselves that has been deliberately obscured. And I think there's value in seeing that. I think there's value in, I think there's a lot of value in that. So I hope that somebody out there enjoyed this live, gets to see it at some point. I am going to get going here and move about with my day. Please like and share, comment if you're interested in any other topics. Thank you so much.